more intelligent, more emotional, perhaps even inclined more increasingly toward altruistic behavior. Right? These are all tendencies in evolution that Murray Bookchin is not going to have a problem with, saying that this is kind of what he believes. So let's dig in a little deeper. But remember, the essential thesis of social ecology is that nearly all ecological problems are social problems. So every time you encounter an ecological problem, as a social ecologist, you want to identify the social structures of domination that parallel and help to perpetuate that domination, that instrumentalization of, that ecological whole that you object to. All right, so just do the economic social analysis on the Snake River dams, for example. The Snake River dams involve a transfer of wealth from some people to other people. That reflects a relationship of domination, right? Some people have more importance over another person. So there's very obvious social ecological analysis that you can do of those lower Snake River dams and why they should come out, right? And now you have a whole host of other resources to draw on from within the social justice tradition. Think of environmental justice not as claiming that the environment has moral status, but think of environmental justice, which is kind of the political movement, the political offshoot of social ecology. If we can think of social ecology as a philosophical movement, then the political movement that, in the same way that, for example, Earth Firsters are a political offshoot of deep ecology, right? We could say that social ecology is to environmental justice movements the way that deep ecology is to Earth First, all right? So there are some strong environmental justice movements. In fact, there's a group right here in Portland. OPAL, I think, and they have a website, OPAL. I always forget what that stands for, but that's the name of their nonprofit organization right here in Portland. So if you're interested in getting involved with social ecology or with the political wing of the social ecology movement, which is environmental justice, then contact that group here in Portland. All right, and like every group inspired by social ecology, they identify all ecological problems as social problems. The basic problems which pit society against nature emerge from within social development itself. Divisions between society and nature have their deepest roots in social divisions and conflicts between human and human. All right? So at a practical level, social ecology gravitates toward a holistic and anthropocentric axiology. But notice I stress at a practical level. Because actually, Bookchin also offers us this reading of first and second nature is how he describes it. But that's how he organizes his metaphysic, and that's how he wants to argue that that value is being generated outside of humans, but it just makes sense for us to organize our land, air, water, wildlife management policies on holistic and anthropocentric terms. So he kind of ends up agreeing with Norton, really, is what Bookchin does. At a practical level, let's just be holistic anthros, okay? And he might even embrace this term weak anthropocentrism. But he's going to say at a metaphysical level, let's not confuse ourselves and believe that that's the only kind of value that's possible, right? Because he also is a keen observer of evolutionary history and ecosystems, right? I mean, he lives in the city most of his life, but clearly he studies nature too. And what he sees when he studies nature is centers of value all over the place, right? And he might even embrace something like biocentric egalitarianism too, right? He's going to say that's not effective. That's not a good framework for forming our resource policy, right? But at a philosophical level, he might end up, because there's value being generated all over the place, according to Bookchin, right? So you can't describe it metaphysically. His account of value is not anthropocentric, but he's saying that practically speaking, we ought to just organize our resource policy along holistic anthropocentric lines, okay? And then normatively, you might ask, well, what is his normative theory? And it's probably just this mishmash of utilitarianism and Kantianism, right? And he doesn't really try to pin himself down normatively. As many of these new thinkers, right, the deep ecologists too, they don't want to get pinned down into some normative theory either, do they? Nor do the environmental pragmatists, nor do the ecofeminists, or any feminists really. A lot of these thinkers are arguing that we have to deconstruct these relationships of domination that are embedded so deeply in our thinking, right? In our institutions of thought and in our other cultural institutions, and we have to overcome those hierarchies, right? And then after we do that work, then maybe we can start considering what a new normative theory might look like. But until then, the very project of doing normative theory, right, is problematic, because the very project is rooted in patriarchal, dualistic, Cartesian, right, ways of thinking. So anyway, so that's why the environmental, it's hard to pin them down, right? We can pin them down as holistic and anthropocentric, these social ecologists. But it's hard to say whether they're utilitarians or whether they're Kantians or whether they're Humeans. Sometimes they sound like all of them, right? At different times, they sound like different ones. So, and there's a reason for that, right? Because they're reaching for something else, and they can't quite find it, so they just kind of give us this criticism, right? This powerful cultural criticism. Which includes a recognition, that humans aren't the only ones who have moral status. Although, we might as well, like Norton says, we might as well organize around our policy around human beings. We're not the only ones with moral status. Okay, but criticism of and political activism, for example, against extractive industrial, against the Tesoro Savage oil terminal, right? The social ecologist is going to base his or her argument against the Tesoro Savage oil terminal around the long-term welfare of the human community, right? Of the global human community. And, it's very interested in making a difference around the world and how we relate to our resources. So it's going to make arguments that are fairly anthropocentric. Domination and destruction of the natural world is rooted in domination and destruction of the global human community. All right? And the ongoing, right, social and ecological, this breakdown that we're experiencing, which is just accelerating, we're shielded from it because we live in such a wealthy society, right? But around the world, things are breaking down, really big time. And all these breakdowns are rooted in a long-term, an ongoing process that Bookchin agrees with Peter Kropotkin about this. There's been this long-term destruction of ancient customs of mutual aid. And any historian who's worth his salt is going to pay attention to this. The mutual aid tendency in man has so remote an origin and is so deeply interwoven with all the past evolution of the human race that it has been maintained by mankind up to the present time, notwithstanding all vicissitudes of history. And then the rest of this page of notes, I just invite you to think a little bit about social ecology versus regular ecology, right? Versus regular ecology of the kind that's described by Leopold, for example, right? There's a social ecology that has to include all of the human-built environment and all of our institutions, right? Our institutions of commerce and politics, right? That's what social ecology has to include, all of this, right? Not just the natural world. But it is instructive, perhaps, to compare how different capitalism's social, economic, and political pyramid is from Leopold's land pyramid, right? We see all these tendencies in our society that cut against the grain of what we would observe in a natural community, in an ecological community. This dramatic disparity in wealth and income that we've observed that's growing bigger and bigger, right? Disappearance of social class mobility, loss of access to education. These are all examples of tendencies that humans degenerate into as a result of an unhealthy relationship that capitalism encourages. I'm always tread very lightly around the subject of capitalism because it's so huge, right? And how do we define it well enough in order to begin criticizing it? So I just try to stick more narrowly with this one aspect of capitalism, which of what we see around us, of real life, actual capitalism, actually what happens, right? The most pernicious and destructive and dangerous aspect of that is what Christopher Stone keeps bringing us back to our attention back to, right? Namely that under our current system, those resources which we all hold in common are easily prey to to a corporation that wants to externalize, and that has to, right, in order to make a profit, that has to externalize a big part of its cost of doing business. And so we see the waste and refuse of extractive industries all over the world, right? That those people who profited from those activities are not paying for. And perhaps that could be addressed by, like the way Stone is addressing it. Social ecologists would perhaps endorse Stone's proposal, but a social ecologist would probably also argue that we just need more government interference in the marketplace. We have to go beyond, we have to do more than just reform our legal system. We actually have to have an activist federal government that, you know, steps in more regularly. Anyway, so, but the point of all this is that perhaps, you know, we can consider that the ecology of society under 21st century corporate capitalism is in fatal conflict with the ecology of the earth. That, you know, that appears to be what many social ecologists are arguing, right? There's just this fatal conflict, and we you know, we're either going to be driven by ecological necessity, right? The term used by Leopold. We're going to be driven by ecological necessity to transform the ecology of our, you know, the ecology of our society and our economic system, right? Because our economic system encourages us and requires that we continue digging deeper and deeper and doubling down, right? Doubling down, right? The predatory capitalist class keeps doubling down on what they're doing. I think that's perhaps how I've come to understand this phenomenon of that strange man with the orange hair. It's the doubling down, you know, of the id of capitalism, right? The doubling down of all the ugliness, saying, no, the problem was we didn't have enough of this, right? We need to have more. That was the problem. We need more deregulation. We need more oil out of the earth. We need to frack and drill more, which is, of course, that's what that orange hair, that guy with the orange hair, that's what he's all about, right? At a natural resource level. And narcissism and greed, and just the celebration, you know, of a limitless, right? The celebration of the rugged individual who's just limitless and screw the government. I got this, man. I built this all by myself, right? And let me do whatever I want, et cetera, right? And that's just on steroids now, just going just absolutely hog wild. And these TP, you know, this tendency toward global fascism, right, is what you're looking at with these trade agreements. That's what you're looking at. Fascism in this raw, in this technical sense, right? You don't need an autocrat, although that orange-haired guy might be a good candidate if that's where you want to go with it, right? But you don't need an autocrat to have global fascism. Global fascism is just the rule by transnational corporations, right? Which is what these transnational corporate tribunals set up, right? They sacrifice the sovereignty of people to these global arbitration panels, right? That's actually the model for that form of government was not in Nazi Germany, but in the other Axis power, in Italy. Uh-oh. And that orange-haired guy, if there's a historical comparison, would not be the dude with the weird mustache, but would be the Il Duce, right? The Mussolini. I don't like to mention these people's names, but anyway, and that's right. And that's the model of TPP. That's the model of these global agreements, right? Is a council of corporations, and that's what the government of Italy. That's what the fascist government of Italy was all about. It was a council of corporations replaced the legislature, right? That's what Mussolini just dissolved parliament, dissolved their legislature, and then appointed these different people who were all his cronies in the business world, right? And they formed this council of corporations, which then was the federal government of Italy. And that's now what is being put in place at a global level. And we might not care about this, you know, except for its consequences for our natural resources around the world, because it's undermining, for example, the power of people in the United States to protect our old growth forests, for example. It makes it harder, right? it makes the sledding a lot more difficult for an environmentalist. Yes?
Did you see last week that Trump tweeted?
We're not supposed to say his name.
He had a Mussolini quote.
I noticed that. I read some reference to that, yeah. Yeah. No, well, you might all take this with skepticism, and I encourage you to. The students describe the process of getting an education as just going back and forth to all these different professors. Go take a class in the economics department, and you get a very different point of view. And I would be the last person to say that the point of view you get over there is somehow wrong. So it's up to you to go explore all these different points of view. And I offer one point of view, but I would never. We're all about learning how to think and not what to think, right? Keep that in mind. It's just about, but how to think involves you have to consider a whole range of possibilities, right? That's all part of how to think. But where you land in the end and how you conclude, what you conclude in the end, you got to make up your own mind. I get a little politically beyond the mainstream quite a ways. And maybe that's a bit off-putting for some of you. I don't know what you've all been exposed to, but hopefully you're all in agreement that some things need to change. How that's going to work, I don't know. But these different traditions are offering us different possibilities. For some people, the economic emphasis of social ecology is too much. Like for someone like my dad, who's more of an old school Sierra Club kind of a guy. But he's also a socialist. But his approach to natural resource policy is not really informed, by the social justice movement. He's much more of just a traditional environmentalist. But as I've grown older, I've come to realize what these social ecologists are saying is absolutely true. And actually, we can't afford that luxury anymore of thinking that we can keep our resource policies separate from our economic system. Right? If we want to effectuate a harmonious relationship with natural resources, then we probably need to dramatically change our economic system, either along the lines that Stone proposes, or along more classical kind of Scandinavian social democratic lines, the way that Bernie Sanders is talking about, perhaps. Anyway, let's take our break, and then we'll get into Murray Bookchin a little more, okay? So let's come back right at the top of the hour, okay? Thank you. Good, how are you? Yes. Yes. Oh, darn, they're in my office and I forgot to bring them. I can run over and get them though. I wanted to return them to people because I caught up on my grading. So let me go do that, all right?
Thank you.
Right back. Sure.
Yeah.
I'm sure if I don't think there's going to be any, especially at the end of the term, there's the work.
A little bit. Yeah. I don't know what's going to be on. I don't know it's like paper should be
Short response to stuff. Breaking down. I'm sure it's never
Hey, Roy. What's happening, bud?
I think he might need to go out.
What's that?
He might need to go out. He's been.
Oh, no, he was worried about it. He'll be fine. He went for a long walk earlier.
Good job, bud. Good job.
Okay, so a very interesting guy, our new friend, Uncle Murray. Very different. Well, they're all different. You know, all these guys have something different to offer. The terrible tragedy of the present social era is not only that it is polluting the environment, it is also simplifying natural eco-communities, social relationships, and even the human psyche. So the harm inflicted on us is way more than just ecocide and biocide, you know, and the obliteration of biodiversity and these ancient ecological relationships. It's more than that. It's much more because it goes inside of us too, right? The simplification of natural eco-communities. The biggest, huge, shining example of that, of course, is our Columbia River, Columbia Snake River salmon eco-community, right? It used to be, right, those multi-million, they say the conservative estimate 12 to 18 million per year. But I've read other estimates much larger than that, upwards like 20 to 40 million per year. If you count all the salmon that were destined to come up the river and that were intercepted by marine mammals like the orcas outside of Puget Sound, or various other animals that eat these salmon. Anyway, the abundance is just amazing, and that 20, 40 million salmon, that made up that annual population at different times of the year. They didn't all come back at once, right? Different ones came back at different times. It's like a pulse, right? A heart. Each sub-basin has its own unique strain, its own race of salmon that over thousands and over millions of years has specially adapted to those particular conditions. And though that $20, $40 million overall population consisted of thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of micro-populations, right? All of which were calibrated, each of which was a genetic signature of a particular place, right? That carries with it the evolutionary struggle of its ancestors to overcome those obstacles, right? That waterfall right there, this waterfall up here actually blocked most salmon from going farther up into the Willamette River. But there were some winter steelhead and fall chinook, I think. They were able to, their run was timed just so that they would migrate when the water was really high, and then they could just barely make it over Willamette Falls. But they were the only salmon that historically spawned in the Willamette above Oregon City, above Willamette Falls. Anyway, so you see that homogenizing effect, right? Where we used to have thousands, tens and tens of thousands of unique genetic signatures of salmon adapted to unique ecosystems. Now we have primarily hatchery-produced, homogenized fish, right? That are all just pumped out like factory farming, right? Seagoing spam. That's how I've heard a hatchery fish described. Just a seagoing cow. You set them loose for a little while and he comes right back. And they do actually. They swim right back to their hatchery when they want to spawn because they're so artificial. But the real danger is that even the human psyche, social relationships are homogenized and reduced and pulverized and fragmented, right? And then even our relationships with ourselves, because the human psyche is fragmented and pulverized and homogenized, right? The pulverization of the natural world is being accompanied by the pulverization of the social and psychological worlds. In this sense, the conversion of soil into sand and agriculture can be said, in a metaphorical sense, to apply to society and the human spirit. The greatest danger we face, apart from nuclear immolation, is the homogenization of the world by a market society and its objectification of all human relationship and experiences into commodities. If you were to pick a giant towering historical philosopher, what is the language used in the last 10 words or so of what I just read remind you of? What kind of argument? If you were to pick an argument, how would you identify this? When he uses words like objectification.
It's Marx, right?
Yeah, Marx, and Marx is a Kantian. So he's criticizing our culture from the perspective of someone who says that the instrumentalization of the human being is wrong. And a culture which forces people to instrumentalize themselves and which routinely instrumentalizes people by, for example, creating economic conditions that are so hard to survive in that you have to go get a job doing something that you don't identify with at all and completely instrumentalize yourself for 40 hours a week or more, right? Because of what we're driven into. And there's a problem with that, right? Because the human spirit is an end in itself and cannot be instrumentalized absent some very grave moral violation, right? And so any instrumentalization is a moral violation. And if these economic institutions are so all-encompassing that they force us to instrumentalize ourselves, then we need to change these, right? That's what Marx is saying, right? If we want to take Kant seriously, then we have to change our economic institutions. If we want to take seriously the idea that instrumentalizing people is morally wrong. All right, so there's a little bit of biographical information about Murray Bookchin. Born in 1921, died in 2006, about 10 years ago at the age of 85. held academic positions only sporadically. He earned his living mostly as a writer, editor, and lecturer, and he was also, I believe he was an electrician. I don't know that much about his life, actually, what he did on a day-to-day basis. But I've already been over most of the stuff there. So here we're going to get into, we're going to dig into what Murray Bookchin offers us as environmental ethicists, environmental philosophers. So this is his evolutionary biological account of the origins of moral relations. And guess what? Our old hero, Charles Darwin, is making yet another appearance. He seems to make an appearance every week in this class. And sure enough, Murray Bookchin pretty much accepts the same account of the origins of morality that, but he, all right, anyway, this is interesting. I mean, we don't want to, I don't think it wouldn't be accurate to say that Bookchin shares Collicutt's view, or that Bookchin flirts with this sociobiological account that Collicutt flirts with, right? And that Wilson flirts with, of ethics, right? Of all of ethics having a sociobiological basis. Because Bookchin wants to say that